Undercover boss asks about her apartment. She says I sleep in my car. Monday morning. A quiet morning between rows of old warehouses and wide parking lots stained with oil where the sun always arrives late because the dawn is hidden behind towering industrial rooftops. The Sunrise Fork branch of New Dawn Calf nestled quietly at the corner of the intersection, small, worn out with a faded sign battered by dust and wind, yet it still opened right at 60A. A steady habit in the shaky routines of the working class nearby. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the renowned calf chain, walked in today wearing a faded fleece jacket, an old baseball cap, and scuffed leather shoes. He didn't enter as a CEO and brought no assistant. Just a middle-aged man playing the part of a newcomer to the neighborhood, curious to explore a breakfast spot everyone around here says is cheap and real. He chose a seat at the counter where he could see every movement in the calf. Yellow light glowed over stainless steel tables. The espresso machine hissed in short bursts. The smell of toast drifted lightly through the air. A few construction workers in uniform were quietly eating before their shifts. No one spoke much. Only the sound of spoons tapping cups and a ceiling fan spinning with a soft clatter like the background music of an old film. Michael picked up the menu, not many options. He ordered toast poached eggs and a black coffee. When the waitress brought it over, he looked up. The girl around 20 years old, light brown curly hair tied up in a ponytail. Her eyes looked a little sunken, but she still managed a polite smile. "Thank you," Michael said softly. Then, like a small, everyday conversation between an older man and a young waitress, he asked, "Do you live nearby?" A harmless question. It seemed like small talk, just something to stretch the quiet moment. But the girl name tag said, Jamie paused for half a second. The smile was still on her lips, but her eyes no longer reflected any light. Her voice dropped almost like a confession she had no reason to reveal. "Actually, I sleep in my car." Michael froze. His hand still held the coffee spoon, now suspended midair. His whole arm felt like a cold wind had swept through it. He said nothing. But a silence expanded between them, a man with salt and pepper hair and a young woman still pouring coffee before sunrise. "I sleep in my car." No exclamation mark. No tears. No pleading look asking for sympathy. Just a truth tossed into the air so light it could slip away unnoticed. But for Michael, those words felt like a blade silently slicing through every layer of disguise he'd wrapped around himself for this undercover trip. He didn't ask more. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't dare rush. As if afraid that pressing further would shatter the fragile shell Jamie clung to just to get through the day. Jamie turned away back to work. She poured coffee, cleared pastry trays, took orders as if nothing had just happened. As if that one sentence didn't belong in this reality. But Michael couldn't let it go. In over 20 years of running his business, he'd heard hundreds of stories about employees overcoming hardship, but never had someone told him in the middle of an ordinary morning that they were sleeping in their car.
Not because others weren't struggling,
but because they knew he was the CEO. They knew he could make decisions, but he could also ignore feelings. Jamie didn't know. She just thought he was a stranger. And maybe that's why she dared to be honest. Then a small twist, a strange detail that caught Michael's eye. As Jamie poured coffee for the next table, she quietly accepted a tip from a middle-aged man. But instead of dropping it into the communal tip jar as required, she gently clenched it and slipped it straight into her pocket in one swift, almost invisible move. Her eyes flicked quickly around the calf, not because she feared the customers would see, but because she feared someone else, someone with more power. Michael frowned, lifted his cup, took a sip. The bitterness hit his tongue, but not enough to drown out the sentence still echoing in his mind. "Actually, I sleep in my car." That sentence was a silent alarm about something deeply wrong. Not because Jamie did anything wrong, but because the entire system, a full-time worker at a breakfast cafe, couldn't even afford a place to go home to. Michael put down his cup, took a deep breath. Today's story, he knew, wouldn't end with just a simple breakfast. It had only just begun with 7 words. And he thought pretending to be just another customer, knew he couldn't walk away without digging into the truth. Sunrise Fork, the smallest branch of the New Dawn calf chain, located on the edge of an industrial zone wedged between a large parking lot and an old bus stop. Outside, the white-painted wooden sign had faded. The letters were slightly askew, worn down by rain and wind. But inside the calf still held a kind of warmth that's hard to explain, the scent of freshly baked bread in the air, a soft golden light bathing the oak bar, and the gentle hum of classic jazz from a small radio speaker wedged in a kitchen corner. Michael Foster entered at 6:25 a.m., right at the start of shift rush hour. He wore a gray cap, a denim jacket, and scuffed leather shoes, deliberately dressed to avoid recognition. Sunrise Fork had once been a source of pride, one of the original cafes built to serve the local working class at affordable prices. But recent reports troubled him, staff quitting without notice, customers complaining about a tense atmosphere, low productivity, and unusually high turnover rate. No one recognized him, and he didn't need them to. Michael chose a seat at the bar where the early light slanted through the foggy glass, casting a golden reflection across the scratched wooden counter. From here, he could observe the bar, the kitchen, and even the mood behind the prep area. The kitchen door swung open. Jamie stepped out, the young woman who had just stunned him with the words, "I sleep in my car." Jamie didn't look any different from the hundreds of employees who had worked for New Dawn's simple cream-colored uniform, ash-gray apron hair tied up high, always in worn-out sneakers. But something about her held his gaze. Maybe it was the way she tilted slightly every time she greeted a customer, just enough to be polite but never overdone. Or maybe it was the silence in her eyes, like someone used to never being asked how they were. Michael watched as she approached the counter, lifted a tray of pastries, then bent down, and he froze. Beneath the sink, there was a transparent plastic bag. Inside were a few personal items: a toothbrush, a tube of toothpaste, a small towel folded neatly. Not something someone brings for an early shift. Something someone hides just to survive. He sat still, a quiet unease rising with each heartbeat, not because of what he saw, but because of what he hadn't seen in any of the reports. A few minutes later, Jamie served coffee to the last table, then returned to the counter. A middle-aged man, seemingly a regular, greeted her with a friendly smile, then pulled out his wallet, placing a folded bill on the counter. "For you, you. Keep it," he said gently. Jamie smiled, her gaze softening slightly. But just as her hand picked up the money, a voice called out from the order station, "Jamie, tips go in the jar." Derek, the shift manager, standing there, arms crossed, eyes locked on her. Jamie paused. For a brief moment, Michael could see her hesitate. Her fingers tightened slightly on the bill, then released. Without saying a word, she returned to the counter and placed the tip in the glass jar. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes were different. Derek, early 30s, clean buzz-cut, crisp uniform, walked over to the counter after making sure Jamie had stepped away. He checked the order count, glanced over each person as if scanning for errors. Michael quickly noted in his small notebook, hidden under a napkin, "Manager directly controls tips, no transparency." A little later, Lori the calf's cook came out to deliver some plates. She was in her 40s, sun-tanned skin, kind eyes. When Jamie quietly returned to the counter, Lori gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a soft touch, almost instinctive. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jamie just smiled, shook her head. "I'm fine. Just a bit cold." Michael saw it all, from the way Jamie gripped the tray to how she gently adjusted her apron strap. Every small gesture spoke to him. This girl was trying. Not to rise through the ranks, not to be seen, but simply to survive. Another quiet twist revealed itself. Jamie didn't leave the calf once during the entire 3 hours he sat there. She didn't drink water. She didn't take a break. She didn't step outside for fresh air. Derek, on the other hand, left twice to take calls in the back alley, once even stepped over to the neighboring shop to grab coffee from a competitor, which according to company policy was a clear internal violation. Michael added another note to his notebook: "Manager ignores company culture, staff too afraid to even drink water." At 9:00 a.m., Michael stood up and paid for his simple meal in cash. But instead of leaving, he walked quietly toward the sink area. Jamie was crouched, scrubbing the floor, unaware. He glanced down at the plastic bag in the corner. Still there. No one had cleaned it up. No one had hidden it. And he knew, without needing another word, that Jamie had spent the night in the caf. He took a deep breath.
A part of him wanted to walk away.
To let this story end as a quiet, sorrowful moment. But the other part, the part that had built new dawn because he believed a morning cup of coffee can change an entire day, would not allow him to stay silent. Because a cup of coffee should not be brewed by hands that are trying to survive or by hour. The morning shift passed in the usual hurried rhythm. The coffee grinder roared beneath the sunlight streaming through the large window. Table 4 asked for another order of pancakes. A middle-aged man complained that his eggs were slightly overcooked. Everything seemed normal unless you looked at Jamie's feet. She bent behind the counter, quietly rubbing the heel inside her faded shoes. A small, quick motion, but repeated constantly, as if her body were sending a distress signal that no one cared to receive. Michael sat nearby. He saw it. "Where's your car?" he asked, as if it were just a casual question while waiting for a refill. Jamie paused.
She didn't think he would ask that.
But caught off guard, she answered truthfully, "I parked behind the supermarket across the street." She tried to say it lightly, as if describing any ordinary parking spot. "There's security at night, so it's safer than the last place." Just 2 sentences. No hesitation. No complaint. Only a cold fact like the frosty breath on a car window each winter morning. Michael sat upright, saying nothing. But the coffee cup in his hand had gone cold, or at least he no longer cared about its warmth. The girl in front of him, the one who just handed a customer their drink with a thank you, was living between shifts. Her pillow was the front seat. Her blanket, a thin coat. Not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to survive when rent outpaced even a full-time paycheck. Later in the shift, Jamie walked to the back kitchen to grab more clean towels. Michael suddenly noticed a small plastic bag in the corner inside were tissues, a toothbrush, a comb, a small water bottle, and an old bottle of lotion. She didn't carry a purse because everything she needed was in that bag. A quiet, emotional drop, subtle but lingering, gently seeped into the viewer's mind. During her 10-minute break, Jamie didn't sit down to eat. She stood outside the caf holding a slice of sandwich and a bottle of water. Michael walked past, pretending to ask for directions to the bus stop. Jamie smiled and pointed the way, but as he turned away, he saw her tuck the other half of the sandwich into a napkin and quietly slip it into her pocket. No one asked why she didn't finish it. No one wondered if that was her dinner. A regular customer, Mr. Dean, around 60 years old, called Jamie over to hand her a tip double-folded. "Thanks for always remembering how I like my coffee," he smiled. Jamie thanked him, but then Derek, the shift manager, flashed a look from behind the counter, and she dropped the money into the shared tip jar as if by habit. Michael had seen this once before, but this time, he didn't just see, he began to feel the weight of a workplace run by rules, but lacking kindness. A system smooth enough to sell thousands of toast orders each week, but not humane enough to protect a girl who sleeps in her car. At the end of the shift, Jamie went into the small break room in the back. Michael followed, standing just near the entrance. He saw Jamie open her wallet. No credit card. No cash except for a $5 bill and a few coins.
She pulled out a small piece of paper, a phone bill.
Then, a warning letter from the car rental company. If she continued parking overnight for several more days, they would tow her car. Michael stepped back, leaning against the wall. He didn't know whether he felt angry or sad. Maybe both. A voice called out from the counter, "Jamie table. 7 needs more syrup." Jamie quickly folded the paper, tucked it into her pocket. Her face returned to its usual smile, but her steps had slowed. Not because she was tired, but because she knew no one here really wanted to hear where she slept. Michael wrote a line in his notebook, "Sometimes the best workers are the ones most easily forgotten." And the audience, those watching from behind the screen, had stopped eating breakfast. They were waiting for something. Not just the CEO reveal, but action. Michael didn't rush to speak. He noted every detail like a conductor quietly listening to an orchestra about to fall out of tune. He sat in the corner of the cafe, observing like an ordinary customer, but his eyes searched deeper into every smallest silence. One morning, as Jamie brought out a tray of pastries to the counter, he spoke softly as if making small talk. "How long have you been working here?" Jamie looked at him, hesitated slightly, then nodded. "Over 10 months. Long enough to know when to keep quiet." Michael paused. The answer wasn't sarcastic. It was true. A truth learned at a price. No one should have to pay silence to keep your job. The first emotional drop fell not in tears, but in that sentence. And from there, the cracks in the system began to show. Another employee, a blonde woman named Tessa, approached while Michael stood near the pastry counter. "You're a stranger, but I'm guessing you've seen it too, right?" Michael didn't ask. "Seen what?" He waited. Tessa lowered her voice. "Jamie asked for an extra evening shift." Derek refused, then said, "We need flexible people, not ones begging for money." Michael tightened his fingers around the coffee cup. Later, he spoke to Marcus, the young man who had just started 2 weeks ago. "How do they divide tips here?" Marcus glanced toward the counter. "Even if customers give someone tips directly, it still goes into the jar. But no one really knows how it's split." Derek says, "Trust me, I'm fair." Michael said nothing, but he drew a line in his notebook. Then one quiet afternoon with few customers around, he saw Jamie bend under the counter and pull out a small fabric bag. She took out a bottle of pain reliever and a crumpled pack of tissues. She applied the medicine to her knee, then stuffed everything back into the bag and pushed it into the corner, the same place everyone assumed was just for the mop. In that moment, Michael saw more than just a tired employee. He saw a human being trying to survive in the space the system had forgotten. After her shift, Jamie didn't head out the main exit like everyone else. She walked around the side of the cafe, pulled a key from her apron pocket, and opened a car door. An old hatchback parked beside the dumpster out back. She climbed in and pulled down the sun visor curtain, not wanting anyone to see. Michael stood at a distance, his hand resting on the closed notebook. That night, he didn't sleep, and neither did the viewers. They couldn't look away. They weren't watching to wait for the twist. They were watching because they wanted to know, would someone do something for that girl? Right now, Wednesday morning, a day that seemed normal at Sunrise Fork. The coffee still smelled good. The toast was still crispy. But inside Michael, something had begun to burn. He rose from his seat and walked slowly to the counter. No one noticed until he stopped standing straight, one hand lightly placed on the worn wooden surface. His voice rang out, not loud, not rushed, but every word cut through all the noise around him. "Who was responsible for scheduling shifts and managing the tip distribution here?" The question dropped dry as paper. Derek looked up from behind the espresso machine. He didn't come over right away, but the hesitation in his eyes showed he knew what was coming. "It's me," he answered, a forced smile flickering across his lips. "Why is there a problem?" Michael didn't reply right away. Instead, he turned his gaze to the left where Jamie stood frozen in place. The young girl still wore her faded apron. Her hands clutched a cup of freshly brewed coffee. The steam fogged up her glasses, but she didn't wipe them. She just stood still, lips pressed tight as if trying to swallow something that hadn't gone down in a long time. Michael looked directly at Derek, but his words were meant for everyone. "I'm just trying to understand." He began. "How someone who shows up earliest, works 6 days a week, takes no leave, never complains." He paused. The air followed. "Has to sleep in her car." A moment fell unreachable by anyone. One staff member behind the counter set down a metal spoon. Tessa stopped pouring water. Lori from the kitchen peered through the small service window, her eyes wide. Only Derek still stood there, back stiff, lips twitching, but unable to produce a sound. Jamie now bowed her head. Her hand still held the coffee cup, but her fingers had turned pale from gripping too tightly. A drop of water, whether from the cup or her eye, slid gently across the back of her hand. Michael saw it. And so did the audience, those watching this journey unfold. This wasn't the kind of climax with a dramatic soundtrack. There was no thunder, no narrator voice, Only a man who had built an entire coffee empire now confronted with a truth so small it hurt. That within the very system he had created, someone still had to choose between paying rent or keeping their job. And that truth wasn't in the weekly reports, wasn't on the revenue charts. It lived in the way someone made coffee but hid her pillow in a cloth bag. Michael looked back at Derek, and this time his eyes were sharper. "Do you know where she sleeps every night?" Derek shook his head very slightly, then tried to say something but didn't make it. Michael raised his hand, just a gentle motion as if to stop him. "You don't know. And worse, you never asked." The silence swelled to suffocating.
Someone in the kitchen dropped a spoon.
No one picked it up. Michael didn't say more. He simply turned, looked out the glass door where early morning sunlight touched the half-finished breakfast on the table,
Then he returned to his seat.
wrote something in his notebook.
Slowly. And the whole calf still hadn't moved.
Michael stood up. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an old employee badge, faded with age, its edge lightly scratched. Holding it up, he spoke firmly in a low voice that needed no further emphasis. "I'm Michael Foster, founder of the new Dawn Calf system." The room exploded in silence. Derek froze. Jamie held her breath. Staff in the kitchen stood as still as statues. And the customers, though they didn't fully grasp the situation, could feel something had just been dragged into the light. Michael looked straight into Derek's eyes, then spoke as if issuing a standard quality control directive. "I want to review this morning's internal camera footage. And I want the last 3 months of shift schedules." Derek blinked. For the first time today, he had lost control. But he still tried to maintain composure, of course, just that each branch's shift system might be a bit diff. Michael wasn't listening. He turned to Jamie. "You don't need to say anything." Then he looked toward the screen. The camera turned on. A clip played clearly on the screen. Jamie was cleaning a table. An elderly customer gently slipped a tip into her hand along with a warm smile. But just 2 seconds later, Derek walked over. He didn't touch the money, but he glanced at it very quickly, then said something. Jamie looked down, then slowly dropped the bill into the shared tip jar behind the counter. No note of acknowledgement. No verification. Michael stayed silent, but his eyes never left the screen. Next came a snippet from an internal email file. Subject: shift change request from Jamie to Derek. "I'd like to take on 2 additional evening shifts per week to save money for rent. I'm flexible and can swap with others. I'm willing to stay late." No response. A month later, another email. Same subject. Shorter message. More urgent. Still no reply. Michael gently tapped the table. "Did you read these emails?" Derek swallowed hard. His voice lowered.
Scheduling's been really tight. A lot of people want hours. Michael raised his hand to stop him.
"I didn't ask about the schedule." He opened his laptop, scrolled through the compiled shift roster. Jamie's name, repeated again and again, always appeared in the lowest traffic shifts. Weekend mornings. Early weekdays. When business was slow. No evening shifts. No busy weekend coverage. Michael turned to Derek.
So, how do you explain this? Derek looked around, searched for a supportive glance.
No one offered one. He took a step back, hands splayed open like an invisible shield. "I was just following each location's policy. Every branch is allowed to assign shifts based on local needs." Michael placed his hand on the counter softly, but the sound landed like a final verdict. "There is no policy in my company that turns a hardworking person into someone without a home." He spoke each word clearly. "There is no system allowed to make an employee sleep in their car just because they're not on a manager's priority list." The calf went completely still. Jamie, still standing behind the counter, lowered her head. But not out of shame. This time it was because of something she hadn't felt in months. Someone had finally listened. And not just listened, but decided to act. Michael didn't shout slogans. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned a page in his notebook, wrote down 3 lines. No one could read them, but everyone knew after today, nothing would be the same. Michael stood up. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an old employee badge, discolored with time, its edge lightly worn. Holding it up, he spoke firmly in a deep voice that needed no extra emphasis. "I am Michael Foster, founder of the new Doncaf system." The room exploded in silence. Derek froze. Jamie held her breath.
Staff in the kitchen stood like living statues.
As for the customers, even though they didn't understand everything, they could all sense it clearly.
Something had just been dragged into the light.
Michael looked Derek straight in the eyes, then spoke as if reciting a quality control command. "I want to review this morning's internal camera footage. And I want to see the past 3 months' shift assignments." Derek blinked. For the first time that day, he was no longer in control. But he still tried to appear composed. "Of course, it's just that the shift assignment process varies a bit at each branch." Michael didn't listen. He turned to Jamie. "You don't have to say anything."
Then he looked at the screen.
The camera turned on. A clip appeared. Clearly, Jamie was cleaning a table. An elderly customer slipped a tip into her hand, along with a warm smile. Just 2 seconds later, Derek walked over. He didn't touch the money, but he glanced at it very quickly, then said something. Jamie looked down, then slowly dropped the bill into the shared tip jar behind the counter. No receipt. No verification. Michael stayed silent, but his eyes didn't leave the screen. Next came a segment from an internal email file, subject shift change request from Jamie to Derek. "I'd like to take on 2 extra evening shifts per week to save money for rent. I can be flexible and swap with others. I'm willing to stay late." No response. 1 month later, another email. Same subject. Shorter wording. More urgency. Still no response. Michael tapped lightly on the table. "Did you read these emails?" Derek swallowed hard. His voice lowered. "Scheduling's really tight. A lot of people need hours." Michael raised his hand to interrupt. "I didn't ask about the schedule." He opened his laptop, scrolled through the compiled shift log. Jamie's name, repeated again and again, always appeared in the least busy shifts. Weekend mornings. Early weekdays. When revenue was lowest. No evening shifts. No crowded weekends. Michael turned to Derek. "So, how do you explain this?" Derek looked around, tried to find an ally's glance, but no one met his eyes. He stepped back, hands spread like an invisible shield. "I was just following local policies. Each location is allowed to assign shifts based on its own conditions." Michael placed his hand on the counter gently, but the sound ended all excuses. "There's no policy in my company that allows turning a hardworking person into someone without a home." He spoke every word clearly. "There is no system allowed to make an employee sleep in their car just because they weren't on a manager's priority list." The cat fell completely silent. Jamie, still standing behind the counter, lowered her head. But this time, it wasn't out of shame. It was the first feeling she'd had in months. Someone had finally listened. And not just listened, but was doing something about it. Michael didn't shout slogans, didn't raise his hand. He simply turned a page in his notebook and wrote down 3 lines. No one could read them, but everyone knew after today, nothing would be the same.